a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
The Veracity Podcast.
Discovery Sessions.
Hello, Vancouver Island, and anybody else listening. I hope you're hanging in there. Welcome to this very special episode of the Veracity Podcast. I'm this episode's host, Christian, and I'm really excited about this podcast. I sat down with a well-established therapist by the name of Peggy Folks. Peggy has been a well-known therapist and yoga teacher in Victoria since the mid-90s after moving here from Toronto. Over the years, she has offered support and healing to hundreds of adults, youth, couples, and families, helping them to find their happiness and ease in life. She brings a wealth of knowledge, training, experience, and intuition to her counseling practice. Peggy's practice is informed by her nursing background, inclusivity, somatic psychotherapy, trauma healing, and cognitive approaches. She spent 20 of the past 30 years working in community mental health for child and youth and continues now in private practice. Peggy is fully committed to this work, and she truly believes in the potential for being one's best self. This episode in particular focuses on what's happening to people during this pandemic from a psychological perspective, and Peggy shares her insights into how to cope with a variety of scenarios, as well as practical strategies to do so. We dive into interpersonal relationship conflict management, as well as ways to overcome the fear response so many of us are facing right now. I'd have to say that this podcast ended up being a little more personal than I intended it to, but it was meant to be, and Peggy really illuminated some things for me, just in terms of some of the difficulties that I've been experiencing in my personal life. I hope it's relatable, and I hope that you can leave this podcast feeling a little more equipped to cope with one of our generation's most difficult challenges. So with that said, let's get right into the cast. Enjoy. It's truly extraordinary times. And I think for a lot of people, there's been a massive paradigm shift in the last couple months. And I can only imagine your work as a counselor. It must be very revealing in terms of what's happening for people. And I guess before we dive into your work itself, I'd maybe like to talk about your history and how you became a counselor.
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks for having me. And I've given some thought to this question. I'm often asked that. And I think what I would point out is that when I was in my mid-20s, I went back to school, did a career change, became a nurse. And while I was both in school and also working in the hospital and working with patients, my main focus and interest was always how people were doing with whatever they were there for, how they were doing emotionally, what was going to happen for them when they got home, who were their supports. It was the psychosocial end of things that I got very interested in. So that led me to continuing my studies, even though I was by then working as a nurse, going back to university, getting my degree in psychology, taking lots of courses in counseling, that sort of thing. Eventually getting a master's in counseling and education. But back in those early days, I think dovetailing with my curiosity and my interest, my desire to help people on a psychological level, was the fact that I had gone into my own counseling. I re-examined my life and realized that I didn't like the way things were going. I wasn't happy with myself. I didn't actually know myself very well. And my relationships weren't very fulfilling. I didn't feel that I really knew what I was doing in terms of intimate relationships. So I went into counseling on my own, for myself, and that really made a difference. And it just blossomed from there. My skills, I think, developed from that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we can get right into it. What patterns of behavior have you seen sort of shifting or arising since this pandemic hit, we'll say, Canadian soil about 2 months ago?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I hear not only in my practice, like from clients, but also just in the general public or what I hear in reports on the news, that people are really struggling to find a sense of control or balance in their lives. I hear of like some people, there's sort of these jokes you might see on Facebook or somewhere that they have daytime pajamas and nighttime pajamas, and they just sort of hang out in their pajamas all day, which is fine for the first couple of weeks, but that can lead to problems down the road with feeling disconnected, perhaps becoming depressed or very lethargic, or the other thing that's quite common right now is addictions becoming more prominent. Maybe things that people did on the side or just for fun once in a while, they're starting to do more often, not just recreationally. There's been an increase in alcohol sales, for example, of 40%. Yeah. So those sorts of behaviors are increasing. On the other side, I do hear from people saying, wow, I really like this. It's slow, it's quiet. I don't feel like I have to push myself to go out and socialize or be connected to people for introverts, where that's challenging. So they're actually happy about that. Yeah. So those are some of the behaviors that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like for the most part too, everybody's having a slightly different experience with the pandemic. And I imagine you focus primarily on like relationships in particular, intimate ones, or is that?
Not necessarily, no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But within that, I can just imagine that there's probably some difficulty in terms of, say, one partner's experiencing loss of work, and another partner is a frontline worker.
Right.
Like that's just one example, but a lot of disconnects where there's been suddenly a shift. So what sort of advice would you give someone who's maybe experiencing that with, whether it's a partner, a family member, maybe a roommate or something like that?
Right. I think I'd probably, and it would be useful for this discussion to explain what's going on for people right now. We're in a state of heightened fear. We're in a fear place. Some people would call it trauma or ongoing trauma. And several things happen in the body and in the brain when we are in that place, when we're in a really extreme fear place. So the brain shuts off some of the functioning that's not necessary, but it also makes it challenging for us to process everything that's going on. So it is a survival part of our brain. However, it makes it challenging to keep going day to day. Our minds get very focused on the problem or a problem. Some people get into obsessing or overthinking. Maybe they become almost like news junkies. They want to hear every little detail of every single day. Other people's minds get overwhelmed and they kind of shut down. They either want to watch Netflix all day or stay in bed all day. I mean, there can be anywhere on a continuum from both ends of that. People also become really disconnected from their feelings when they're in a fear place. And so they can be numb, or they might be feeling really agitated, really hyper. Their behaviors also change. Right. So some people get really hyperactive. They want to do, and if they can't do anything to solve the problem, then they're going to clean out their cupboards, or people are doing all kinds of things like that. Other people have the opposite. Again, in that overwhelm state, very slow, very lethargic, can't think about very much, or don't feel very creative. So now if we look at a couple or two people, friends, parents and a child, they're all going to have their own individual responses to this ongoing fear. So it does become really challenging to come together.
Right. Would you say that, in a way, this pandemic has sort of become the great revealer? So in a way, it's become sort of a stress tester. So if there was any cracks, say, in a relationship or a family dynamic, now, under the pressure that we're experiencing with this pandemic, it's sort of coming to fruition and expressing itself.
Sure. I think that's true for probably just about any big issue that can happen. Sometimes it's the wedding or having the baby, which can be positive, but that can also bring out, oh, didn't know that about you, or didn't know that about me. kind of thing. An example might be that I was working with a family who contacted me, and they have 3 children. One daughter, I think she's about 9, 10, and she has a history of some anxiety, but nothing, they hadn't been in counseling for it before. It was pretty manageable. With this pandemic, after maybe a month of being stuck at home with her siblings, and her parents are both working from home, she had a meltdown. So what I explained to the parents is that she's kind of like a canary in the mine. She's not the problem. Everybody in that whole family, in that system, has a part to play. And what's really important that they each need to look at their own or have help with their own ways of managing their anxiety. Yeah. And the girl herself, of course, but everybody. Yeah.
So anxiety is such a common thread that humanity experiences on such a deep level for the most part. And what would you recommend right now for, say, folks that are used to going to the gym and exerting energy or performing or participating in some sort of way that is no longer available? Well,
I would encourage them to get creative. First of all, to find out what does help them and to do more of that. Double down on anything that helps them to be relaxed or to forget about what's going on. So like a healthy distraction, having fun if it causes them to laugh or brings out some joyfulness in them. So a lot of people actually are doing workouts at home. The Y, for example, has them online, all different categories. You can do like a cardio workout, in your living room. Some people are doing dance parties on Zoom. One person does the music, everybody else dances in their living room or wherever they're at, or they put on their own music and dance. And getting outside is still really important. I was out today riding my bike, and I have never seen so many runners. It is April, no, it's May, and typically people are getting ready. I don't know if the Times Colonist race might have been finished by now. Maybe it's at the end of April. But anyway, this is like everyone's out there training. I know they're not. They're just suddenly having time on their hands and need to move their bodies. Kids especially need to be able to get out there and move their bodies around. Yeah.
It seems like we've been given this gift, which is a pause. And where this leads is to be determined. I'm not necessarily saying it's positive, but we know for certain that we now have this opportunity to just embrace stillness, at least some of us.
Yeah.
Would you say that it's a good time to maybe deepen a relationship or maybe work on something that perhaps kind of gets left to the wayside just because of the busyness of life?
Yeah. I think if we're thinking about a couple working on a relationship, this isn't really the time to go digging around. You don't need to. The issues will be presenting them. They'll be right there in front of the couple. I would suggest more that they make a note of it. They can write it down and say, when things settle down, we'll have a look at this. But for now, I think really the goal for each person in a relationship is to be kind and loving, both with themselves and with their partner, to really extend themselves in terms of compassion for one another. I actually was thinking about what would I suggest for a couple who maybe are experiencing some disconnect or some conflict through this. I mean minor conflict, we're not talking about domestic violence, but just, in the minor stages of things. And that would be this holding exercise that I like to suggest for people. So the couple would lie down, probably on a bed. They can be fully clothed and lie in a spooning position. So one person's behind the other, and they're lying on their sides. And the one behind puts their hand in front on the heart of the person in front. That person can put their hands on their heart if they want to, too. And the person in the back, their job is to find the breath rhythm of the person they're holding and breathe with them. Just link their breath. The person in front's job is to simply notice feelings that come up. Allow them to come and go. Know that feelings do come and they do go, always, like a wave. if we don't get caught up in them in storytelling. We just breathing, allowing those feelings. And the second thing to notice is how it feels to be held while those feelings are coming and going. When that's finished, it might be 10 minutes or so, they can part and do it another time, or they can turn over and let the one in the front be the one in behind and do the same thing again. You'll notice that I'm describing something that doesn't require, or it's not even suggested to have words. It's not about talking something out. It's about heart-to-heart connection and a message that says, I'm here. I might not get what you're going through, or I might disagree with it, or maybe I have these needs that aren't being met right now. But right in this moment, we're here together, just breathing, and we will get through this together. I think that's what I would suggest.
So it's basically a warm embrace.
It is, but it's linking, really linking the breath, feeling the hearts together. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things when I was talking earlier about what happens with the mind when we're in a fear or anxiety place is that it can become very tight. Our body gets tight, so does our mind. And it can get very narrow, wants control. So it can get very critical, judgmental, and it's very hard to see the other person's point of view because our mind is sort of locked in. So this isn't the time to try and talk things through. Right?
That's really interesting because I guess intuitively I would feel like this would be the time to talk things through, just because I feel like in so many cases, at least just from what I've read or just from talking to friends and family, it seems like things are coming up and they've sort of been brought to the forefront. They can't be ignored anymore because we're in some sort of a crisis. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit on why it should be left until perhaps this is...
Yeah, and it's not black and white. I mean, some couples have the communication skills and the emotional maturity to be able to manage their own side of the street while they're trying to communicate with their partner. But mostly it's because our brains are not working very well right now. Everybody's doing the best they can, but it's challenging time. So I would suggest for many people, it's not a good time to try and talk it through. Doesn't mean I'm saying don't. You can give it a go. If the couple do find that they are able to hear one another, that's what the key for this communication is, that they really have to hear it. The other thing I think, too, sometimes when I'm working with a couple, I'll use the analogy of being on a plane and they're describing what's going to happen when the oxygen masks drop. You put your own mask on first before you turn and help a dependent. So same goes for this. If both people in the couple are doing their own self-soothing, calming their nervous systems, staying socially connected in other ways to other people, finding supports, then they may have the ability to meet with their partner and talk about challenging things. You're right that they're coming up, for sure.
Yeah, even for myself, I was employed here actually, and unfortunately we do a lot of work in outdoor tourism and everything in the restaurant industry and stuff. And so naturally there were layoffs, and I was one of the layoffs. And a lot of my identity was wrapped up in my work. And I didn't really realize how much of it was wrapped up in, that day-to-day grind, if you want to call it that.
Right.
And so all of a sudden I had nothing but time. But of course the structure or like the pattern of my life, which once was no longer. And I just initially found myself just grasping at anything, sort of having an identity crisis. And I'm just wondering, I guess this is somewhat personal, but what would you recommend for me in terms of like this experience I'm having right now?
Sure. Well, typically I would ask questions, but the one thought I had was, I wonder what happened initially with your when you didn't have your structure. If you, again, hung out in your pajamas all day, you spent a lot of time on the computer, but not necessarily constructively, maybe reading lots of other things or going down rabbit holes of all kinds of stuff. So one suggestion for people who've lost their jobs, but also just being temporarily laid off.
Right.
It's not like they're necessarily worrying about finances, but they're kind of going, what do I do with myself? For one thing is about getting up in the morning, having a shower, eating regular meals, looking at your nutrition, you sort of keeping your body and your mind healthy, because this is a challenging time. The other thing is, some people are very introspective, and they're going to want to go, okay, well, let me make a list. What are my strengths? What am I keen on? What am I pulled towards? They're going to want to start exploring all that stuff. Other people are going to go, I'm never going to work again, and crash into, feeling very dependent on whoever's helping them financially. They may get quite lost in all of that. So you want to find a balance in there, for sure. I don't know what kind of person you were or are, but looking at how do you balance yourself? What else do you do with your time in a day? Are you doing anything for fun? Are you doing anything creative? Believe it or not, lots of people are being creative right now. Other people go, I can't think about anything creative. My mind just doesn't go there because it's in the fear place.
Right.
For people like that, they need to calm their nervous systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely got fixated on the news and the numbers, and I was doing a lot of research on the virus itself, and just even going to the macro level and focusing on geopolitics. And I can tell you that it wasn't healthy, and I'm definitely finding a little more of a balance now. But I feel like there's a lot of uncertainty right now, almost this existential panic that I'm sort of feeling, and it kind of manifests in different ways in different people. And is it safe to say that right now, for the most part, we're almost in this state of reactivity, where perhaps we're not using our prefrontal cortex as much, and we're very much in this sort of reptilian fear response, where you see people panic buying and sort of compulsively doing different activities and different things like that.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true for a lot of people, especially in the early stages. This, looking at the numbers and following all that, I think you were not alone. There were probably the majority of our society were doing that. It's tapering off a little bit for a lot of people. Some people actually tell me they're getting bored with it or tired of it. They'd like it to be over. They're willing to do what they have to do, but they're not having fun anymore. That's enough. They want to move on. But I think you're making a really good point about us being in fear. Basically is the reptilian brain. We're in fight, flight, or freeze. And so those things I was describing earlier just kind of fit right into those three categories. So the goal for everybody right now is calming the nervous system. Recognizing when you're feeling anxious and doing the things that help you feel calm. Mindfulness, like your last guest talked about, is probably paramount. Breathing deep, just sitting there and doing deep breathing on a regular basis, and not for just 2 or 3 breaths, but for 10 minutes, just grounding. Some people have a pet, and they might just sit and pat the cat or play with the dog, things like that, and then they recognize, oh, I feel better. Nervous system is calmer, feeling safer.
Do you think that this crisis is going to be it's going to have a huge impact on people's psychology, just moving forward?
I do, but it's interesting because we've had other major things like the war, World War I or World War II. I know people who've survived both of those, or lived in England during the Blitz. That went on for almost 2 years, being bombed every night. Their nervous systems were shot. Well, after the war, they went on and had families and had good jobs, but their personalities were formed or structured around that type of crisis, or the Depression. Or my parents lived through both of the war and the Depression when they were younger, so they became very frugal, not super tight, but definitely very sensible about how you spend money, what you do with money, fixing things rather than buying a new one, that kind of mentality. I think this pandemic, of course, is going to have global as well as societal effects. We don't know what they're going to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it's interesting because, of course, I'm only 31 years old, so I didn't experience any of the world wars, thankfully. But, yeah, it's interesting because in this case, there was what I'll call an info war in terms of information. And, of course, having access to the internet, you're exposed to all these different thoughts and ideas. But also, too, the message and the direction from our government in particular was to be very passive, right? To stay at home and essentially isolate. Normally, at least in most cases with a crisis, it's an opportunity for us to come together and connect. But in this case, we're connecting through Zoom or phone calls. But, I live in a studio apartment, so I was very, very isolated and still chatting with people, but also feeling abnormally disconnected. Like I wanted to engage and be of service.
Yep.
But I was told over and over again that the way to do that was to basically stay at home. And that was kind of conflicting for me. I'm an Aries, so I guess I'm a little bit of a, I got a fire inside and I wanted to just engage, so to speak, and felt sort of this contradiction where I wanted to engage, but I couldn't. And
one way that some people respond to a crisis is to want to get active. They want to get out there and do things. Who was that? Hero Work. I don't know if you're familiar with them. It's a volunteer organization in town that does, what's that word? When they fix up buildings and renovations for nonprofit organizations. So they can't do that right now. People can't come together and work on building or fixing a building. So they put out a request. This was before they started the tent city. They asked for tents, sleeping bags, and sleeping pads only. They didn't want anything else, just that. And they were expecting to get about 200. They got 650 pieces. Those are people wanting to do something. They could go through their garage or wherever their storage unit is and then take these things to the arena in their car. People took them out of the trunk. They had it all, planned for social distancing. Those are people doing things because they want to do something. I was thinking someone in my building, two guys, had notices up. I live in a high-rise, and it said, I'm a young guy living in your building, and because there's a lot of seniors, if you want me to do your groceries for you or go to the pharmacy, give me a call. I thought how lovely that was, that these people are reaching out. People need to do things. Other people don't want to go out at all. They're happy to stay home, keep their doors shut, So looking for places to connect. Yeah, we're doing it online, and it's not the same. There's nothing to replace, touching or being close to one another. But I found going out more often made a difference. Just walking in my neighborhood, still 6 feet away, but when I passed that other person and they would scurry or look away, I always said hello, and they would turn and they'd beam at me. They were like, oh, somebody's there, So that little small things like that, I think, makes a difference. So becoming a little altruistic, perhaps, at this time. It's hard because we're looking at our own survival and losses, like financial losses and worries. But looking out, hit the mic, looking out beyond ourselves is always good for our self-worth and our self-esteem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had this thought the other day, and I have noticed, I've definitely noticed smiles and definitely a shift in terms of people's attitude outdoors for sure.
Yeah.
I've also noticed some anger, and I'm wondering if that anger is masking, grieving the fact that once was is no longer. Could be.
Anger is definitely something that we put up as a defense, and there usually is something behind it, and it could be grievance. It could be fear.
Right.
Or hurt. But fear is a big one, come out kind of blustery. And what I found when people kind of get angry because I got too close or I forgot, is if I smile and apologize, but I smile or laugh, they soften. Because they don't want to be living in their angry place either, And they realize, oh, we're okay. It's all right,
Yeah. If you're experiencing anger right now or fear, I guess you've touched on this, but what would be, like, if you had to choose one piece of advice, what would that be for someone who's in a perpetual state of anger and causing conflict and different things like that?
Sure. There's a saying, the fastest way to freedom is to feel your feelings. And what I think the fastest way to feel your feelings is to be in your body. So we have to slow down. Maybe it's breathing, maybe it's just taking a moment, a pause, just push pause for a minute, breathe, and just feel the body. Feelings will be there wherever they are. You don't have to label them, you don't have to get caught up in them. Just notice them and breathe, and then they will lift and they will pass. That brings freedom. Freedom from being controlled by unconscious feelings, so then we do all kinds of things that we're not, very happy with. But also freedom from obsessive thinking. We might actually recognize, I'm all tense and I'm not because I'm obsessing. And that puts you in the driver's seat to say, okay, what do I want to do about this? You either calm your nervous system, find a way to calm your nervous system, or find a healthy distraction. Some people, especially if they've been in a trauma or fear place before, find it very hard to calm the nervous system. So then they may need to just turn to a distraction that's healthy. And I don't mean, well, you know what unhealthy ones are. I don't really need to list those. So it could be looking at some funny things online. It could be dancing. It could be doing a crossword puzzle, or any number of things that just take your mind off it for a little bit. Have a break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How important is it to be honest right now with the people closest to you?
I think it's very important if you're going to own what you're being honest about. If you're being honest about something about the other person, that's a bit different. But, if you feel frightened right now, or even angry or fed up, or are happy or very close, warm to somebody, letting them know really makes a difference. Yeah. It just means that the other person knows where you're coming from. You may receive something, you may not. You may just feel like you can give that to yourself. Okay, I just acknowledge that actually I'm feeling really bummed out about this, or I'm getting really annoyed with this whole situation. When are they going to, fix it? Or why can't I get out there and, whatever it may be. To acknowledge those feelings goes a long way. Yeah, so to share them with somebody makes a big difference, yeah.
I imagine that this pandemic has been extremely stressful for families, and the family dynamic is always a delicate one, and of course now everybody's isolating together. So what advice could you give, a parent or a sibling right now in a tumultuous situation right now?
Well, I think it's really important that people in the family, especially the adults or children that are old enough to grab the concept that this is overwhelming for everybody. First of all, they're not all used to being cooped up in a household together. Quite often, one or both parents are still working from home, but they're also needing to be the parent. They're needing to be the companion or playmate with the kids, and they're supposed to be a teacher now, and they're not teachers. Some people find it challenging to find the educational material online or to get their kids to sit down. So I think what I'd say to everybody, from the little one all the way up, is to lower your expectations. To, just don't expect mom and dad to always be happy or, friendly or loving. Sometimes they're going to get a little irritated. And for the parents, to cut yourself some slack. Your standards can rest for now. It's okay if you have craft dinner for dinner, or if the kids didn't do all their schoolwork all day and you took a break and went, around the block on your bikes. I think having a routine like the work week, Monday to Friday routine. People get up. They might not get up quite as early as they did because they don't have to commute to school, but, everybody should get up, get dressed, have breakfast, stick to a routine and a schedule. And I actually know some couples, families are having both parents working from home. Mm-hmm. That's not sustainable with children.
No.
So have a talk with your employer or with each other about what that might look like if you change it up. Yeah, something, it's not sustainable.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think of something that crossed my mind the other day, which is that in a way I wasn't really accepting what was coming up for me in terms of anger. Mm-hmm. And took me a little while to get there, but I finally just realized that my anger was valid. It wasn't necessarily like directed at anybody, but it was just simply that moment saying, I'm accepting the way I'm feeling right now. I've been trying to swallow it. I'm just going to let it surface.
Lovely.
And I definitely felt better afterwards, but there was a period of time there where I was definitely holding back and trying to suppress it.
Right. So you've touched on a few points, and one is that's one of the things that we can often do in a crisis is pretend. Mm. Pretend I got it all together and this is all good. And perhaps we do need to sort of pull ourselves up sometimes, kind of dig deep for that strength to keep going. But we also need to be able to acknowledge what is going on at the right time in the right place. And by acknowledging it to yourself, you're offering yourself some compassion. You're like saying, yeah, I do. And yeah, it's valid. Everybody's got different feelings, and whatever they are, they're valid. You can't have a wrong feeling. It just is. And you might even say, there's lots of people feeling this way right now. What do I need? What does that feeling need? Oh, it just needs to be acknowledged. Or actually, I could use a hug from my partner. And then also expressing that to a partner. Anger is fine. You can express anger as long as you're not acting it out or putting it on the other person, but verbalizing your feelings is great. Yeah, it sounds like you felt better for having done it.
Yeah, for sure. I was definitely trying to keep it together and stay grounded, and I was still continuing to meditate, and I was doing, home workouts and everything, and trying to just, I guess, be the best version of myself possible given the circumstances. But eventually though, I was suppressing it, and I did lose my temper. Obviously I contained myself, but it was one of those things where it was a release and it had to happen, and luckily the people close to me acknowledged that, and they said, how do you feel now?
Right, they'll kind of acknowledge that it was okay or normal. Yeah. So I like that you said trying to be the best person that you can be given the circumstances. Everybody wants that. It doesn't look like it to us from across the street, but everybody is striving for the same thing. And being the best person sometimes means that you're crying or you're angry or you're sad. That's all part of being the best person too. It's like being a fully rounded human being.
Right. Yeah. There is something slightly beautiful about this whole situation, which is the fact that collectively, globally, we're all experiencing sort of the same thing, right? I mean, obviously in different ways. And I'm not going to compare Canada to, say, an Iran or something like that, because I know that it's completely different. But, collectively, we all are experiencing this together, and there is something unifying about that, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, there is. And so the other thing that can happen in fear is that people can feel very isolated in themselves. They feel like they're alone, like nobody's really there for them. And that's a really good point to remember, to just look. We are in a fully global situation right now. It's too bad we couldn't have come together for the environment, but maybe the environment made this happen for us. I'm not quite sure how that all works, but we're there now. Yeah. And so that can be a beautiful thing. It can also be an overwhelming thing. People can feel, whoa, that's a lot of suffering going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is the saying that in order for birth to happen, a death has to happen. And with that said, it's more so
Mm-hmm.
could be the society as we knew it in its previous form dying, and then of course something being reborn out of that. And it's definitely an opportunity too for a pivot. Like I've definitely been thinking about, you know, how I want to recalibrate myself moving forward
Right.
into a post-COVID world. And
Nice.
so sort of just this opportunity to
Mm-hmm.
to grow and to make a shift that otherwise couldn't happen or wouldn't
Yeah,
happen.
yeah, that's lovely. I think some of that might be age and stage of life as well. I have clients in their 20s who talk about not being able to reach their goals that they had, and how can I still reach that goal? Like my schooling has been interrupted, and I thought I'd graduate this year, or those sorts of things. And then I have people in their 30s, single and or in families, saying, yeah, this is an eye-opener. We're reevaluating how we've been living our life, and we're thinking we like this slowed down way of being, and we're thinking of how we want to go forward from here, what we want our society to look like, and giving that a lot of thought and talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I guess in terms of counseling, the question would be for people to ask themselves, and what's my role in it? What can I do? Same with if there's conflict with, you know, a partner or family, roommate, what's my role in it? And how can I shift? How can I change it? Same with moving forward. Everyone has a role in this. Yeah. We don't know how it's going to be because it hasn't happened yet. It's not designed. We get to create it. So we can think about what our values are and share those with one another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the frontline workers who are now plunged into this world, some for sure, where they're working twice as hard. They're putting their lives at risk if they're, we'll say, exposed to the virus and different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But also they're seeing family members and friends sort of in a very passive state while they're, you know, operating at 100% or 110.
Yeah.
What advice would you give a frontline worker that's found themselves in this position right now? Because that in itself could probably be alienating.
Yeah, I think it is alienating if the rest of the family or friends aren't cognizant of that situation. But also for that frontline worker to recognize what they need and to ask for that. I'm thinking that, you know, there's lots of people who maybe are single. They don't even have a partner. And they go to work for these 12-hour shifts and they're all geared up and, you know, it's really hard. Who can they reach out to? And for them to actually use the services that are out there. Most employees have an employee assistance program where they can get counseling or counseling through their insurance program, you know, contacting the BCACC, which is who I'm licensed with for counseling. But also just to ask friends and family. It would really, for an example, it would be really helpful for me if you just texted me at the end of my shift and asked me how I'm doing. You know, going in for a 12-hour shift today, or I'm doing 2 days and 2 nights this week. It's really easy for people to know what the schedule is. I used to work as a nurse in the hospital, and what I remember about that, and that was not during COVID, was it was very isolating when I did shift work, because people would forget either that I was working or not working, and so then they stopped asking me to things. I remember concerts would come and go, and I go, oh, but I love that guy, and they go, oh, well, we just assumed you were working. So to let people know, I need contact, I need to, you know, I need to know that you're still thinking about me, that you're there for me. Yeah, it's extremely stressful and we call it frontline. It's the analogy frontline is as if they were in a war, right? They're putting themselves at risk and they're working really, really hard. And then there's the people back home who they're doing it on behalf of. Yeah.
A saying that really resonates with me is life happening for you, not to you.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like for whatever reason, we've all been placed in a different role. But yeah, I guess everybody has their part to play. And even though you might feel like you're passive and not really contributing, in a way you are, right?
Oh, yeah. It's an important role. Absolutely. So if it's a couple, the one that's at home gets up in the morning and makes coffee and packs a lunch or a dinner for the person that's heading off to work. Maybe they would never do that normally, but that encouraging thing, has dinner ready when they get home, all that stuff, does the laundry, those things are vital and important. I think it really calls on us to dig deep into our own inner resources and to value ourselves in whatever way we can, we come forward. Yeah, because it can be frustrating for the person at home.
Right.
You can feel like, hey, I should be out there, and the person out there doesn't necessarily want to be out there, but that's the way it is. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What type of behavior in this moment would you say is probably the most destructive for people?
I'm going to say it would be addictions. The government announced a couple of weeks ago that they were donating $50 million to all the services for women, shelters and sexual assault center. The domestic violence has risen almost 40%. So typically that's about addictions. Not always, but often there's substance abuse in there. So for people to really look at, what am I doing on a regular basis that's good for me? Is it good for me? Do I need to cut back on that and do something else? Yeah, really having a look at how you're handling your emotions and if you're using substances to see if you can get a handle on it. There are also virtual meetings and resources in our community, like AA meetings are still going on online. And there's a youth mental health clinic called The Foundry. That's still open. Lots of places that people can still access help.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so often with an addiction, it's less about the substance and more about the motivation, right?
Yeah.
So would you say that for somebody who's experiencing, say, an influx in alcohol consumption or whatever it might be, that this is an opportunity because of the stillness to maybe focus on the motivation of that behavior and go a little deeper? I know that at the beginning of the conversation, you said that, the middle of a pandemic is not the time to necessarily do that work. But also, too, it might be the opportunity to do that work. And I know you said it's not black and white, but I can't help but think that this might be an incredible opportunity for some to actually hone in on, say, that behavior, maybe that past trauma that is leading to, said addiction.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely, that it is an opportunity. Not everybody takes an opportunity when it comes. I think I would suggest that if someone was going to do that, if they have a serious addiction, that they find support to do that. Just cutting out the addiction and recognizing, oh, I have this trauma, PTSD or whatever's coming up, that's pretty hard. And then they're not going to be, it'll go sideways. They'll find another way to try and stuff that down. So for sure, they can have a look at it, but with support, I would suggest.
Yeah, and I can imagine, too, for some of these folks that unfortunately are experiencing addiction, the people in their lives who maybe normally are quite stable, sort of like the rock in their lives, that's probably shifted, too, in some cases where maybe that stability is no longer, and that's probably quite destabilizing in itself.
Yeah, so it's about broadening our resources, not putting all our, eggs in one basket, not relying on just one person or these particular people. Where else can you get support? How can you support them? Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Even just for myself, I've definitely been snacking a lot more.
Well, I was thinking, when I was talking about addictions, I was thinking there's eating. Yeah.
Netflix.
Yeah.
Tiger King.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting, just the influx of activity, of course, on Netflix and YouTube and different things like that. And obviously, it's not as detrimental as, say, a smoking addiction or a drinking addiction or something like that. But it's still a form of escapism. And I remember earlier in the conversation, you were talking about having a balance with a distraction, but it being a healthy distraction. I'm wondering if you could maybe just elaborate a bit, because I am noticing no shortage of binge watching and different things like that. And it just, I mean, it's a great distraction, but at the same time too, at some point, this is going to inevitably end, and it might be difficult to walk away from that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. We develop habits. Yeah. I often get people to make 2 lists. One list is self-soothing, things that they do for themselves, maybe last 10, 20 minutes, that they know feels good when they're finished. So it could be simple as having a bath. It could be having a playlist of music that's mellow and makes them feel good, that kind of thing. And I suggest a list because we're not always in the mood for doing one particular thing. So make sure you have a variety of things that you can check in on. Distractions, healthy distractions, another list. And again, you know, they can be anything that you're going to mix it up. You're going to do different things on different days. There's opportunities to sing or to learn to play that guitar that you've got in the back cupboard and never played, or the ukulele that someone gave you for Christmas and you haven't picked up. Any small little ways of distracting yourself is good. Put it on the list. It's also good to have a media break in the day. An hour, okay, including social media, like an hour off. What am I going to do with that time? They say to themselves. Something will come up. They'll figure something out. Maybe at the beginning they have a nap, but gradually, day 2, 3, 4, they go, oh, yeah, I could go for a walk. I could call a friend. I could call my aunt who lives in Toronto, and I know she's in a nursing home and no one's allowed to visit. You know, it could be as simple as that. Media break.
Yeah, speaking of media, I mean, I'm pretty familiar with the format myself, and I think it's just important for people to remember that a lot of what we've been seeing is sensationalized for the purpose of grabbing your attention.
Yeah.
And also, too, I mean, even with Netflix, you have that 10-second countdown when the episode finishes. They want you glued on, you know, that TV show or that film for as long as possible. And there's, you know, no shortage of sophisticated people and engineers behind that technology trying to gain your attention. So it's not an easy fight, right? And I think that it's important for people to know that it's definitely a battle to, you know, try to just deter yourself from engaging with what's happening, because it's, you know, we're basically isolated and, you know, exposed to all these platforms. And so really, I just know even for myself, I was it was almost like a dirty high for me to check out the news and sort of just go through the different, you know, journalistic platforms and everything. But by the end of it, I was a little more informed. But a lot of the time, it was fearful and an uncomfortable experience where, if anything, it just sort of led to more questions in a lot of ways, because of course this is happening in real time, and it's almost like each hour the narrative shifts a little bit, and there's a lot of different strings attached. And I mean, I guess I sort of became a little bit of a media junkie myself, and I'm not entirely sure what that really did for me, other than, you know, inform me about yesterday's news, which is no longer relevant today.
Yeah.
And so now I'm trying to just, I guess, focus more on just my mental health well-being and trying to find that balance.
So again, it's that part of our brain that's taking over that thinks this is good for us for survival. If I can figure it out and have all the information, I'll be okay. So one thing that I might recommend is pushing the pause button, whether it's at the end of a newscast before you go on to the next one, or at the end of one episode of Netflix, or after you've had that, you know, one glass of wine. Pause. Become more mindful of, how am I feeling right now? Maybe stand up, stretch, walk around the room a little bit, come back. Do I want this? How am I feeling about it? Is this is this feeding me? Is this good for me? Do I need to do something else? Like, kind of like mastery, developing a sense of mastery over our own way of being. What you're describing isn't a whole lot different as to how many of us were before the pandemic, running from A to B to C and kind of on this just like go, go, go all the time. Not much time to say, how am I feeling about this, and is this good for me, and do I enjoy it, and what do I want to do next?
Right.
So we have the opportunity to do that, but we can sort of avoid the opportunity by getting too hooked into the media.
Human doings rather than human beings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's so true. And it just left me feeling empty, to be honest, when it was all said and done. And I mean, there were days where I probably did 4 or 5 hours of research, and I was actually identifying as somewhat of a detective in my head, as trying to crack the code, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I felt like I discovered something, I had to call someone and let them know. And sometimes they're just like, I don't want to hear it. You know, I'm gardening and I don't need to know about what's happening in China right now. And then I would just feel alienated, and I'm like, but this is huge.
Yeah.
And of course, it was just one of those things where, I think a lot of people can probably relate to that. But it's, I mean, sometimes it's doing more damage than it is good. And
a lot of people can relate to it. And part of it is that someone has to remind us, oh, this is what's happening. It might be just when they say they don't want to hear about it, or it might be that they say, you know, every time I talk to you, you're kind of on about this, or you sound kind of charged up about it. You know, we can gently remind each other, you know, how's this making you feel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely ranted to my mom the other day, and she just listened, and she's like, are you done? I'm like, yeah.
Okay.
She probably just threw me on speaker and walked away.
Yeah.
Came back, but, it was just one of those things where, and again, too, maybe I was a little fired up, and she didn't take it personally.
No.
It's just because I do feel like there are days where, I guess it's a little bit of an existential crisis of what's to come. And I know that things seem promising, but then also, too, there's a lot of gray areas, and it's easy to get kind of carried away in it all.
That's right.
The mind and what could be, and catastrophizing, I guess, would be the best way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another skill, is to monitor our thinking. You know, for people who get into sort of obsessive thinking or lots of worry, to check in. Well, what am I saying to myself? Is this true? Is it realistic? Am I exaggerating, or is it black and white? And what can I say to myself that's actually neutral or more normal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
These expeditions, we'll say, into this type of research, it can have real effects, right? Like, I mean, you are seeing people marching on the street, and there's a debate to be had about that, but it's one of those things where it can end up actually being dangerous. That's the reality, right? And we certainly are in a time now where, like I said, we've never been exposed to this much information simultaneously, and at the same time been in a form of house arrest. So it is difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people also feel it's kind of surreal.
Yes.
Right? They get that. I remember feeling that way the first couple of weeks going out, and I'd look around, I go, like, it just felt strange. There's nobody around in my neighborhood, and it all just, I thought, this can't be happening. And again, that part of my brain can't process everything that's going on all the time.
Yeah.
Whether it's information overload or just the strangeness of what I see at the grocery store.
It is surreal. Yeah, definitely. Almost feels like the Twilight Zone. I was going for a run the other day, and I just saw a bench wrapped in caution tape.
Yeah.
And for some reason, that just triggered something in me and kind of created this fear, and I had like this moment.
Right.
And it seems like there's also beautiful moments as well where you're seeing nature flourish, and there's a certain serenity, especially when you're out and about. But it's sort of this, it's almost like a dichotomy of beauty, but also terror. And it's almost like I'm sort of oscillating between the two.
Yeah. So taking time to drink in the beauty is what balances that and calms the nervous system so that the terror, the fear isn't so prevalent in the front of our minds. The other day I took a break in Beacon Hill Park, sat on a bench, was admiring a tree, and then I noticed this log. There's 2 of them, but the famous logs of turtles. 11 turtles can line up on this log, apparently, at a time. But the day I was there were 3, and then there was 2, then there was none, then there was 3, because every time they got on, it would start rocking, and they'd shift around and try and keep it level, and I was mesmerized. I'd never seen that before. I don't stop and sit down. I go for a walk. That's usually what I'm doing. And I was really grateful for that moment to just, I did stop on purpose to just calm because I was feeling anxious. I thought, okay, I'm just going to sit here. That's a nice tree. But yeah, taking time to admire to look at the beauty. Nature is still doing its thing. The birds are going crazy. Mm-hmm. One person said to me, she thought there were more birds this year and they're really celebrating the weather this particular day. And I said, I think they're always there. We don't hear them, or we don't stop to listen. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was talking to a friend the other day, actually, and he was telling me that he feels like the modern currency today in this situation is high morale. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
High morale. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by high morale?
Staying positive and trying to be a light, I suppose, during this time where, so many people, of course, are unemployed and everything. And he was just saying, keeping morale up, so to speak, was the new form of currency. And I thought that was pretty profound. And I'm just wondering, like, you have talked about the fact that everything we're experiencing is valid, but also, too, how important is it to, just try to be a positive light right now?
Mm-hmm. I think it's really important. It's always important for us to have reminders of the light and people to remind us of that, and also to be honest with ourselves. We can't always be that person. Some people think, it's my role in the family. I have to be the one that's, not always. Someone else could take on that role as well. I guess I think of the Viktor Frankl quote. I won't quote him exactly, but he says, when we can no longer manage a situation, when we can no longer control a situation, we're challenged to manage ourselves, to pull up in ourselves, to change. If we can't change a situation, we change ourselves. So perhaps some of us need to be a little more optimistic. We know we're going to get through this. We absolutely do. Yeah.
Do we?
Yeah, we do. We do.
Sometimes I wonder. Yeah, but I suppose I need to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fear.
Yeah, there it is.
The fear is, it's interesting how it manifests. And
so something people can do if they're kind of thinking, I don't know if I'm going to get through this, or we're going to get through this, the sky is falling kind of thing, is to share a story with a friend, ask the friend to listen, and the friend's job is to listen to the traits or qualities that they hear in the story. And the story is a time in your life that you overcame a struggle. You faced something that you didn't want to have to do or was hard for you. And you just tell the story, and they write down what they heard about you, how you got through it. They'll hear it. And then they just tell that back to you. I heard that you really stuck with it even though it was hard. Or I heard that you allowed yourself to be afraid and tell people that you were afraid, but then you went ahead and did it anyway. That you stretched yourself and you learned something about, whatever it may be.
Right.
Yeah. That can help us this helps our morale.
Yeah. I guess the fear for me is just more so the economy and different things like that.
Yeah.
And it's
going to be different.
Yeah.
We know that.
Yeah. And again, too, it's not necessarily that I think we're going to end up in a completely dire situation, but I suppose it's fear of the unknown. where there's
Exactly.
definitely going to be a shift. What that is to be determined.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it's just, I guess I might just be grieving, the experience that I once had. Yeah, fear of the unknown and sort of just the uncertainty happening, especially on the global stage right now.
Yeah. And again, that can hook people into worry and trying to predict. Sort of figuring, well, if this happens, then that might happen, or if that happens, then this, for themselves. It's a survival thing again. And it's okay to think about that for a little bit in a day. Give yourself time to spend an hour kind of thinking about what you think the future might hold for yourself, or what your plans could be. It's okay to plan a little bit, but no more than an hour. You kind of let it go and move on to other things, because some of that is just unknown. It's like worrying about something that we have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think too, for people in my generation in particular, we've never really experienced anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for a fact that every generation has its challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And this is definitely one of the biggest challenges of my generation. Not to say that there haven't been challenges before, but I suppose, I always come out of an experience of conflict or discomfort or whatever it might be, feeling stronger and more rounded. And I guess we're sort of in the midst of it, and it's sometimes I guess you get lost in it, and you can get lost in the weeds a little bit.
Yeah,
the day to day, and I suppose the isolation and everything. But I am hopeful. I just also too have my doubts, and I guess I'm kind of just expressing my internal dialogue here, but I think that a lot of people can relate.
Many people.
Yeah. Well, I think that we had a nice discussion on quite a few different things, and
We did.
With that said, I'd just like to give you the opportunity to tell people where they can find you, or any recommendations for counseling or different things like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, you can find me online. I have a website, and or they can phone me or text me. Should I give my number?
Yeah, if you want to give your
Sure.
website and your number. And
Yeah, it's 250-382-6002 in Victoria, and I do offer currently virtual sessions, telephone sessions, and we'll see what will happen down the road, but in person. And I offer a 30-minute free consultation, so people can give me a shout. I'm listed under the BCACC, so if they look that up, it's the BC Clinical Counselors Association. They'll also see a list of counselors there. They can put in they can shop around, see what they're looking for, see what's a good fit. Lots of people specialize in different things. And as I mentioned before, if they're employed and they have coverage, there's EAP or their insurance. Many of us, myself included, offer a sliding scale, especially during this time, to make it affordable. I often find people need counseling when they least afford it. So don't let that be a deterrent. Yeah, to come forward anyway. Yeah.
And what is it exactly that you specialize in?
Oh, I don't necessarily have a specialty. Individuals and couples, and I work a lot with trauma and anxiety, but mood and relationship issues, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, stay positive, folks. We're here with Peggy, folks, and that's a wrap.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks
for having me.
No problem. Thanks for coming on.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for listening to the Veracity podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to support us, be sure to like, comment, or share. You can also follow us at Veracity Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for updates and exclusive content. If you're interested in being a featured guest on the show, you can visit our website at veracitypodcast.com and head on down to the Contact Us section. Thanks again for listening. It means so much to us, and stay tuned for more conversations just like this.